Well, for more on this and the growing investment trend in clean energy, I spoke with Paul Bledsoe. He's president of Bledsoe and Associates. I asked him about what he thought about the timing of the Rockefeller Group's decision.
Well, it is interesting timing. Increasingly, shareholders around the world are becoming worried about the value of fossil fuel assets. Not only are fossil fuels subject to regulation from the emissions they produce that lead to climate change, but there is some concern that they're overvalued as a whole and that investors tend to actually lose money on those investments. So the timing is quite...
Now, some people are wondering whether this is purely an ethical decision or perhaps smart business. Would they still be making the same decision if oil was $200 a barrel, do you think?
That's a very interesting point. Obviously, fossil fuels are very cheap right now, not just oil, but also natural gas and coal. That has a lot of implications for investors. I think the most fundamental concern of the Rockefeller Group and investors around the world is the fact that fossil fuels are the principal cause of climate change. And that is the main vulnerability to their use and to investment in them. There are, however, fuels for carbon, coal, and natural gas to generate and store them safely underground. In the United States Senate and in the United States House, just recently, bills have been introduced to provide large incentives for commercial scale carbon capture. The Chinese are working on these technologies, many of the European countries. I think we need to recognize that we're going to need carbon capture and storage to safely use fossil fuels.
Now, with that being said, obviously there's still backlash with a lot of what ExxonMobil was doing, and now the Rockefeller Fund, which made its money from Standard Oil, which became ExxonMobil, is calling ExxonMobil's conduct reprehensible. Now, from the outside looking in, it might look like they're being hypocrites, since that's how they made their money. There's
an incredible irony here, isn't there, that John D. Rockefeller really started the modern oil business, and that led to Exxon. But I think the Rockefeller Family Fund recognizes something more basic, which is we cannot emit from fossil fuels all we have, or the climate will become out of control and dangerous. Therefore, we have to do something to limit emissions, whether that's pricing carbon, whether that's capturing CO2 emissions, whether that's incentivizing other technologies. We're going to need all those approaches. Hopefully, they'll put those investment dollars in clean energy and carbon capture and other ways to solve the problem, not just say they won't invest in fossil fuels.
And that's the issue, because where do they go from here? Is it enough to just say, we're not going to invest anymore, especially since they played such a huge role in a company that ended up making such a big difference when it comes to climate change?
So you might have noted that Bill Gates and about 20 other major investors, billionaires around the world, have committed to making investments in breakthrough energy technologies, particularly research and development, that would lead to large reductions in emissions globally. I think there's a movement around the world to try to put investment dollars toward more responsible technologies that can reduce emissions, help us not just meet the Paris Climate Agreement, but really reduce emissions far more than that agreement does. It's worth pointing out that that agreement would still allow global temperatures to rise twice what climate scientists say are safe levels. So we really have to make those investments.
And what about other industries outside of fossil fuels? You also have tobacco companies, alcohol companies, companies that perhaps could be getting some more negative backlash. So what do they do in situations like this?
So historically, as you know, when products are regulated, the value of those products plummets. It is reduced. Users, the markets dry up, or at least are reduced. One analogous commodity would be sugar today. We've seen just recently that the Brits have proposed a tax on sugary drinks. So I think we're beginning to see using regulation, investment incentives, and the tax code broadly to incentivize technologies and other practices that are healthy and safe, and to retard practices that are dangerous. And clearly, climate change and the use of fossil fuels are now dangerous.
And just lastly, do you think that the incentives will come more so from governments regulating or perhaps public outcry? What do you think is the bigger motivation for businesses?
The key is alternatives. The public can outcry all at once, but 95% of U.S. transportation is today based on oil. So we have to invest in alternatives. We've got to move toward cleaner, not only fossil fuel-based cars, but electric vehicles, natural gas vehicles, hydrogen vehicles. It's all about investment in long-term technology. Hopefully, the action by the Rockefeller Family Fund will put a spotlight on the needed investment for alternatives, not just disinvestment in fossil fuels.